If you're trying to conceive and quietly wondering if life can be whole without a baby, feeling anxious, uncertain, or weary in your faith, you're not alone. Welcome to the Infertility and Trying to Conceive podcast for Christian women. I'm Linda Renee, an Aussie wife, mum, and follower of Jesus. Here I share biblical truth, simple conception tips, offer emotional support, and have honest conversations about what struggling to conceive really looks like as a Christian woman. My prayer is that this podcast lightens your load, keeps you anchored in Christ, and helps you move forward with confidence, peace, and hope. Christ goes before you, and I'm right here helping you look to Him every step of the way. Let's begin. I wanted to chat to you today about sleep. I haven't chatted much about this on the podcast, but I do want to consider it because I think it's genuinely one of the most underestimated things that you can actually do for your fertility. And I mean that in terms of how it can physically affect your hormones. So thanks for listening in today, and we'll get started. So I just wanted to start with something from my own journey. When I was in the thick of infertility, there was this thing that would happen at night. Sometimes I'd crash. I was so exhausted that I'd literally just sleep for an hour or two. But then I'd wake up and be completely wired. Other times I'd just lie there from the start, listening to my husband fall asleep within 5 minutes of his head hitting the pillow and then sleeping soundly, while I was just there, staring into the darkness and unable to just switch off. I'd go through every detail of wherever we were in the cycle. I'd symptom spot. I'd wonder if this month was going to be different. I'd try to remember what my body felt like the month before. Sometimes that's all I'd do for hours until I finally drifted off or the alarm seemed to wake me, which made me just feel like I'd barely had any sleep at all. And most of the time I probably actually hadn't. And then other times something would come to mind. Some question I hadn't thought yet to ask. Something I'd half read somewhere that I needed to know the answer right now. Because I'd be thinking to myself, what if this is the missing piece to help me get pregnant? What if there was something I didn't know about, some detail about improving my chances, something I could do differently that nobody had mentioned yet? And at this point, I was tired. I was genuinely exhausted, but my brain was still completely wide awake. So I'd be there under the blankets, phone brightness turned all the way down so I didn't wake my husband, and I'd be scrolling through thread after thread in fertility forums at 2 a.m. reading other women's experiences, trying to find something, some thread, some comment from someone that might give me the answer that I was looking for. That one thing that would finally make the difference. And I'd tell myself, just this last thread and then I'll sleep. But it was like I was being pulled. What if the next one has the answer? And I just stop before I get to it. Just one more. And then I'd check the time, and it'd be 3 a.m. And then it'd be 4 a.m. And sometimes I'd put the phone down. I would. But other times I'd find myself another hour deep into a thread from 2013 about luteal phase defects written by someone whose username was TTC Hopeful Forever, and I still wouldn't have found what I was looking for. And if you're a driven, type A kind of person, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And even if that's not your personality, desperation can push you into patterns that you might not normally fall into. And so if this resonates, you're in good company. And I want to say that searching itself wasn't actually the problem. Using your mind, trying to understand what's happening in your body, being open to answers, that's good. God gives us curiosity, and the capacity to learn. He gives us brains and medicine and each other's experiences for a reason. And honestly, forums did help me at points. I actually found out through other women's experiences that IUIs were pretty successful for women with my fertility issues, and that ended up being part of the path that God used in helping me get pregnant. So I'm not dismissing any of it. But what I didn't see at the time was the 3 a.m. or the 2 a.m. version of it that was costing me something real, not just spiritually, but also physically. The sleep it was stealing, the anxiety it was feeding, and the way it left me feeling more depleted than when I started. And that depletion likely had a direct effect on the very thing that I was trying so hard to get sorted, my fertility. So that's what I want to get into today, because I think once you understand the physical and spiritual cost of this, it adds a layer to why it matters that goes beyond just feeling tired. So when you don't sleep and we're talking consistently getting less than 7 hours, your body reads that as a threat signal. And in response, it releases cortisol. That's your stress hormone. And cortisol isn't a bad thing in and of itself. You need it. It wakes you up in the morning. It helps you deal with things that need dealing with. But when it's chronically elevated because you're not sleeping, and you're not sleeping because you're anxious, and you're anxious because of everything you're going through, it can start to interfere with the hormonal signals that your body needs for ovulation and implantation to happen well. And this doesn't mean that you can't get pregnant under stress. Women have always gotten pregnant in hard circumstances like during war and other stressful situations. But it does mean that things can be working against you rather than with you. And in a season where you're already doing everything you can to improve your fertility, you want your sleep habits to help and not hinder. This is sometimes described as the difference between fight or flight mode and rest and repair mode. And sleep is where the rest and repair work happens most fully, where your hormones can regulate, where your body does the quiet work that you can't always see, but that can have a really big impact. And there's also something called melatonin, which most people think of as just the thing that makes you sleepy. But melatonin is actually a really powerful antioxidant. And research has actually looked at melatonin levels in follicular fluid. That's the fluid that surrounds your eggs, and found that it plays a role in protecting egg quality. Here's what's important to understand though. Your body produces melatonin in darkness. When light, especially the blue light from screens, hits your eyes, it signals to your brain to stop producing it, which then delays sleep. Which is why what you do in the hour before bed matters more than most people realize. And then there's the emotional piece, which might be the one that you feel most right now. Not sleeping great lowers your emotional threshold. Studies show it increases anxiety and depression, makes you more reactive, makes hard things land harder, which means that negative test, that insensitive comment from a well-meaning person, that pregnancy announcement at work, all of it hits differently when you're running on empty. Some of what you're feeling might not just be grief. Some of it might be exhaustion. Now, I want to bring something in here that I think matters, and I don't want to just skip over. God designed rest from the very beginning in Genesis. On the 7th day, rest was something that God instituted. He didn't just tack it on to the end. It was built into the structure of creation itself. God rested, and he called it good. And that rhythm, work and rest, effort and release, was always meant to be part of how we live. Psalm 127 says he gives sleep to those he loves. And that verse might feel like a gut punch when you're on your 4th night of lying awake, staring at the ceiling. And I'm not saying that if you just trust God more, you'll sleep better. That's not what I mean, and it's not what Scripture means. But what I do think it means is that rest isn't something that you earn. It's not a reward for when things are sorted. It's a gift. God built the need for rest into your body. It's not incidental. It's part of how he designed you to function. And in a season where you might be gripping everything as tight as you can because so much feels out of your control, sleep might actually be one of those places where you can practice letting go a little. And the example in Scripture that I come back to often is David in Psalm 3. He writes this psalm while fleeing from his own son Absalom, who was trying to take his throne and his life. His kingdom had collapsed and he was surrounded by enemies on all sides. He writes, "I lie down and sleep, I wake again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of thousands of people who have taken their stand against me on every side." David says he slept, not because the situation was resolved, not because it was safe, but because he trusted in the one who sustained him. And I find that really comforting, because the question for David wasn't whether things were okay. They weren't. The question was whether God was still in charge of the outcome. And because the answer to that was yes, David could rest. I think that's something we can gain from this passage. Not that everything is fine, it's not, but that the one who determines the outcome hasn't changed. And that rest, real rest, is possible even in the middle of this struggle with infertility. So let's get into what this actually looks like practically. I know you're already carrying a lot, so I want to give you some things that are genuinely worth considering when it comes to sleep and explain why. There's 6 things that I want to walk through with you, and none of them are complicated. But I do think that if you can take small steps towards doing these things, you may just very well feel a difference. First, have a routine. This is probably the most unglamorous thing that I'm going to say today, and also possibly the most impactful. Your body has an internal clock, your circadian rhythm, and it responds really well to consistency. So when you go to bed and wake up roughly at the same time every day, your body starts to anticipate it. It starts preparing for sleep before you even get into bed. It learns the pattern. And one of the strongest things that you can do to anchor that rhythm is to get natural light in the morning, even just stepping outside for a few minutes. Light in the morning is one of the most powerful cues that your body uses to know when the day starts, which also is the same for when the day should end. And so when that pattern is all over the place, late nights, some nights, trying to catch up on weekends, you're constantly resetting that clock and making it harder for your body to do what it needs to do. So if you can, pick a consistent bedtime and a consistent wake time and try to hold to them. And then build a simple wind down routine in the 20 to 30 minutes before bed. It doesn't have to be elaborate. A herbal tea, washing your face, a bit of light stretching, reading something physical like an actual paper book or magazine rather than a screen. You're essentially giving your body a cue. This sequence means the day is ending and sleep is coming. And over time, it starts to respond to that. It's one of the simplest changes you can make and can genuinely make a difference. The second thing is your phone. And I know and you know, but I want to say it anyway and say it a little differently maybe than you might have heard before. The blue light from your screens suppresses melatonin as well. It signals to your brain that it's still daytime because it mimics the same kind of light as the sun. So if you're physically in bed by 9:30 p.m, if you're scrolling until 9:28, you're working against your own sleep hormones. But here's what's more specific to you. Fertility content at 10 p.m. is not a neutral activity. You might pick up your phone to check one thing and find yourself 40 minutes into a thread, or blindsided by a pregnancy announcement, or reading something that sends your anxiety into a completely new direction. Your nervous system can't distinguish between something on a screen and something happening right in front of you. It responds the same way. Your heart rate goes up, stress hormones go up, and sleep gets further away. And we've already talked about how that can impact your fertility. You likely know the pull, and earlier I described exactly what it feels like. So if you can, put your phone down at least 30 minutes before bed, an hour if you can manage it. And where possible, charge it in another room. Removing the decision altogether can reduce the temptation to pick it up and use it. The third thing is your sleep environment. So your body temperature needs to drop slightly to fall asleep and stay asleep, which is why a cool room actually helps. Not cold, but just cool. That feeling of being snug and warm under the covers while the room itself is a bit fresh, that's actually the sweet spot for sleep. And darkness matters more than most people realise. Even small amounts of light, glow from a charger or a street light coming through the curtains, that can signal to your brain that it's not fully time to sleep yet. So blackout blinds are genuinely worth the investment if light is an issue for you. And if you're a shift worker trying to sleep during the day, they're definitely worth looking into. They can really make a significant difference in your sleep. Some people also find white noise helpful, a fan or an app, something that gives your brain something neutral to settle on, rather than just silence, which tends to amplify every little sound. It's worth trying if you haven't. And this is really relevant for me right now because I'm currently doing 4 night shifts a week, and there's often a lot of noise that wakes me up as I'm a light sleeper. So I generally sleep with an earpod or earphone in my ear that's not against the pillow. And I actually find the audio Bible really good to listen to when I need background noise, as the voices often lull me to sleep. I'm not sure that that's actually what they intend, but I find the cadence and the tone really does it puts me to sleep. Fourth is what you eat and drink and when. So try to finish eating at least 2 to 3 hours before bed if you can. Digestion actually takes a lot of energy, and your body can't wind down efficiently if it's also trying to process a full meal at the same time. It doesn't need to be a rigid rule. Life doesn't always allow for that. but as a general rhythm, it does make a difference in how well you sleep. And caffeine is also worth thinking about if it's part of your daily routine. Caffeine has a half-life around 5 to 7 hours, which means a mid-afternoon coffee is still half in your system come bedtime. And there's also some research linking higher caffeine intake with reduced fertility and increased miscarriage risk. So if you're not already factoring that in, it's worth being aware of. If sleep is still a struggle, try keeping caffeine to the morning and see if it makes any difference. Magnesium glycinate before bed is also something that a lot of women genuinely find helpful, and there's decent evidence behind it. Magnesium plays a role in calming the nervous system, and many of us are low in it without realising. It's gentle and worth looking into, but just check with your doctor first, particularly if you're in an active treatment cycle. The fifth thing is when your brain just won't stop. This is probably the one that matters most for where you're sitting right now. And I want to say, if this is where you struggle the most, it makes complete sense. This is a season where your mind often worries about so much. And so it's really natural that it doesn't always switch off easily. You get into bed, it's quiet, and then suddenly everything that you've been keeping at bay during the day shows up at once. The fear, the what-ifs, the appointment you're replaying, the question you forgot to ask, whether this month is going to be different, what you do if it's not. The most useful thing I've found for this, and there's actual research behind it, is a brain dump before you get into bed. And so this isn't journaling where you process or reflect everything really in-depthly, but simply opening a notebook and just writing down whatever is taking up space in your head. The to-do list, the worry, the prayer that you've been half praying for 3 days. Get it out of your head and onto the page. Your brain holds things in its working memory so you don't forget them. But when you write them down, you're telling your brain it can let it go. It's there, it's not going anywhere, and you don't have to keep circling it. And then pray. Doesn't have to be a fancy, well thought out prayer, just an honest, open one. God, here's what I'm carrying. I'm laying it down. I can't hold this overnight. And then try and let your body actually rest in that. It won't always feel easy, but it's the direction to move in. Something else that can help is a body scan. And I want to be clear, this isn't about emptying your mind or anything like that. It's a purely physical thing to release tension. So if you start at the top of your head and you just slowly and deliberately work through each part of your body, noticing where you're holding tension and consciously letting it go. Your forehead, your jaw. So many of us are carrying so much tension in our jaw without realizing it. In your neck, your shoulders, and all the way right down to your feet. And if you want, you can use that time to quietly pray through what you're releasing in each part of your body as you go. Sometimes it sounds almost too simple, but it can really work well. And the sixth and final thing is to try not to nap during the day if possible. And I say this with real empathy because when you're this tired, the idea of not napping can almost feel cruel. But if you're struggling to sleep at night, napping during the day borrows from the sleep pressure that helps you fall asleep at bedtime. And you want that pressure to build across the day. So if you're really flagging in the afternoon, try going outside for some fresh air, getting a bit of natural light, drinking some cold water. A lot of the afternoon fatigue is actually dehydration. And then hold out for bedtime. That said, if you're genuinely needing to nap, there's research showing that a 10-minute nap is enough to restore alertness without meaningfully cutting into your sleep pressure at night. So set an alarm and just have a nap for 10 minutes only. Any longer and you risk dropping into deeper sleep, which will just leave you groggy and make it harder to sleep that night. So it's there as an option, just use it carefully. And here's what I want to finish on. Sleep isn't a luxury. It's not the thing that you just get around to once the fertility journey is over and life calms down. It's part of the fertility journey. It's part of how your body makes hormones, how it protects eggs and regulates stress and gives you the emotional capacity to keep going through one of the hardest seasons of your life. And one more practical thing I want to mention before I finish. If you're taking your basal body temperature in the morning when you wake up, you need at least 3 to 4 consecutive hours of sleep before you take it in order for the reading to be accurate. So if you're waking at 3 a.m. and scrolling for an hour, your basal body temperature reading later that morning is going to be off. The sleep deprivation doesn't just affect your hormones, it can affect your ability to track them too. And I know getting sleep right now in this season is genuinely difficult because the uncertainty doesn't simply clock off at 10 p.m. The worry doesn't wait until the morning. It sometimes follows you into the dark and gets louder when everything else goes quiet. I know that. And it might be that your sleep struggles aren't really about your phone or your bedtime routine at all. It might just be that when everything goes quiet, your brain won't follow. The fear shows up, the grief sits in your chest. And sometimes no tip fixes that. That's just what this season feels like at night sometimes. And that's actually where Psalm 3, I think, matters the most. Not as a technique, but as a reminder. David didn't sleep because his circumstances got better. He slept because he knew who was holding them. And that's true for you tonight and every night. So take what's useful from this episode and leave the rest. This isn't meant to be another list of things to feel bad about not doing. Just pick one thing if you can. Just one, and see if it helps. That's enough. And say to yourself, I've done what I can today. And even if I haven't, the rest is not mine to carry. Before you go, thank you so much for listening. I pray today's episode has brought you fresh hope for whatever comes next. If someone comes to mind today who could truly use support in this space, please share this episode or the podcast with them. It might be exactly what they need. And if you could take 30 seconds to give me a star rating or leave 1 or 2 sentences about what this podcast has meant to you on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd be ever so grateful. Your feedback not only helps others find the podcast, but it truly makes my day. And words of affirmation are my love language. And if you're not sure how to do that, I'll pop the links in the show notes below. Lastly, although I do have a nursing degree, everything shared in this podcast is for inspiration and education only. Please don't use it as a replacement for advice from your personal, medical or mental health professional. There's absolutely no shame in getting additional support when you need it, but always consult your expert team before making any changes to your fertility journey. That's all from me today. Take care, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.